Mr. President, I rise today to talk about the recent bad behavior of Iran. Some important steps that have been taken by the administration to push back on their support for terrorism, their illegal actions, and their support for disorder in the Middle East, but to also sound the alarm that this series of steady actions continues to raise the specter that Iran has an expanding reach in the region and poses a greater and greater threat to our allies, and in particular our vital ally, Israel. Just over a year ago, leading world powers came together in support of a framework for blocking Iran's path to developing a nuclear weapon. That framework ultimately became the JCPOA, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And in the months since that agreement took effect, Iran has taken steps to significantly restrain its nuclear program. That's true. They filled with concrete the core of their reactor at Arak. They shipped out of the country 98% of their accumulated stockpile of enriched uranium, and they have allowed searching inspections by the IAEA, and those are all good steps. Yet the Iranian regime continues to engage in dangerous actions outside this JCPOA, outside the nuclear agreement, including ongoing human rights abuses, support for terrorism in the Middle East, and its repeated illegal ballistic missile tests. And all of those are ongoing reminders to us that America's security and the security of our allies demands constant vigilance and close scrutiny of Iran's actions. Since last September, I've regularly called upon my congressional colleagues, the Obama administration, and our European allies to be wary of Iran's intentions and to continue to seek ways to effectively push back on its bad behavior. The international community and the United States possess three major non-military tools to lawfully counter Iran's continued bad behavior: financial sanctions, criminal charges, and weapon seizures. So let me first today offer a number of examples of how each of these tools have recently been put to work. First, financial sanctions. On March 24th, the Treasury Department imposed new sanction designations on a number of entities and individuals that have supported Iran's ballistic missile program and on an Iranian airline, Mahan Air, which provides support services, transportation to the Quds Force, an elite Iranian military corps designated as a terrorist organization by the United States Treasury Department. On this floor in early March, I called for the United States and our European allies to further punish Mahan Air by eliminating the airline's access to international markets and airports. Since then, the Treasury Department has taken action against two companies, one based in the United Kingdom, the other in the United Arab Emirates, that have provided financial and material support to Mahan Air. I commend the Obama administration for effectively deploying another tool in our diplomatic toolkit: criminal charges. On March 21, the Justice Department unsealed charges against three individuals who allegedly acted on behalf of the Iranian government and associated entities to engage in hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions barred by U.S. sanctions. These three Iranian individuals stand accused of illegally laundering the proceeds of these transactions and defrauding the banks through which the transactions were processed. Then 2 days later, on March 23rd, a consultant to Iran's mission to the United Nations was also charged with violating U.S. law. The 7 charges levied against this individual include conspiracy to evade U.S. sanctions against Iran, money laundering, and arranging false tax returns. Then the following day, March 24th, the Justice Department unsealed an indictment of 7 Iranian experienced computer hackers who led a coordinated campaign of cyber attacks from 2011 to 2013 that targeted 46 U.S. banks and a dam in upstate New York, in Rye. Unsurprisingly, the 7 individuals charged have been linked to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, the hardline conservative military force committed to the preservation of the radical revolutionary Iranian regime. And then just yesterday, the Justice Department announced that the U.S. negotiated the extradition from Indonesia of a Singaporean man charged with conspiring to send U.S. equipment to Iran, equipment later found in unexploded roadside bombs in Iraq. These various criminal charges demonstrate to Iran and the world that responsible members of the international community seek to resolve disputes through international norms and institutions or accepted ways of conduct, not provocative missile tests and ongoing violations of sanctions. In addition, the fact that each of these indictments occurred after the implementation of the nuclear deal While Iran did fulfill the letter of its commitments under the agreement, these ongoing violations demonstrate that the United States cannot continue to counter Iran's bad behavior and regional aggression without undermining, These indictments demonstrate that the United States can continue to counter Iran's bad behavior and regional aggression without undermining the ongoing implementation and enforcement of the JCPOA. That brings me to the third tool in our arsenal, weapons seizures. On Monday, the U.S. Navy announced that the previous week, the U.S. Scirocco and the USS Gravely intercepted a vessel in the Arabian Sea that contained an illicit Iranian arms shipment to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. After boarding the ship, American sailors confiscated 1,500 AK-47s, 200 rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and 21 .50 caliber machine guns, including the various weapons shown here. This marks the third successful interdiction of illicit arms in the Arabian Sea since late February. On March 20, a French naval destroyer seized nearly 2,000 AK-47s, 64 sniper rifles, 9 anti-tank missiles, and much more. That followed an interdiction a month earlier, on February 27th, in which an Australian naval crew intercepted another shipment off the coast of Oman that contained 1,900 AK-47s, 100 grenade launchers, 49 machine guns, and other illicit arms, headed to Yemen by the way of Somalia. All of these interdictions were done with coordination and support from the United States. These interdictions, I'll remind you, aren't just military exercises. They prevent weapons from falling into the hands of dangerous terrorists or Houthi rebels. And just as importantly, these actions send a strong signal to Iran that the international community continues to refuse to tolerate Iran's destabilizing actions and its support for terrorism. The picture to my right shows an Australian vessel, the HMS Darwin, the crew from the HMS Darwin, part of a U.S.-led multinational coalition, intercepting and boarding a dhow that holds a shipment of illicit arms, likely intended for the Houthi rebels of Yemen. The conflict in Yemen pits the Yemeni government, backed by a military coalition led by Saudi Arabia, against the Houthis, a group allied with the former president and the radical Iranian regime. Iran's support for the Houthis has devastated Yemen and the Yemeni people. Over a year of fighting has led to more than 6,000 deaths, including thousands of civilians and more than 30,000 injuries. And the human suffering has been dramatic. According to the World Health Organization, more than 21 million people, more than 80% of Yemen's population, today require humanitarian aid. Yet instead of aid, Iran sends weapons. These are not the actions of a responsible member of the international community. These are not the actions of a government the United States can trust. As the United Arab Emirates ambassador to the United States, Youssef Al-Otabia, recently wrote in our Wall Street Journal, the international community must intensify its actions to check Iran's strategic ambitions. And while I am pleased at recent actions by the United States Navy and our key allies from Europe and around the world in the region off the Arabian Sea, I think there is more that we can and should do. That's why in the months to come, instead of talking about giving Iranians access to U.S. dollar transactions, I think the United States should lead coordinated international efforts to enforce existing sanctions and seize the illicit arms shipments through which Iran continues to fan violence, terror, and instability, not just in Yemen, but in Syria, in Iraq, Lebanon, and the broader Middle East. The imposition of further sanctions, the levying of criminal charges, and the successful interdiction of weapons all show that the international community has an array of tools to push back against Iran. But just having the tools is not enough. We must continue to take action, and when multilateral mechanisms fail, Congress should work on a bipartisan basis to see what new tools or authorities we can give the administration to further crack down on Iran unilaterally. Lest we need another reminder that Iran remains unwilling to meet the obligations required of a responsible member of the international community, on March 30, their supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, claimed that ballistic missiles are central to Iran's future, despite Iran's commitments under UN Security Council Resolution 2231. The Obama administration should continue to designate bad actors for sanctions, pursue criminal charges where appropriate, and seek accountability for Iran's ballistic missile tests in the UN Security Council. We must continue to work hand in hand with our international partners to interdict arms shipments to Hezbollah, to the Houthis in Yemen, and the murderous Assad regime in Syria. We must not accommodate Iran in any way given its continued ballistic missile launches, its repeated human rights abuses, and its continued support for terrorism. I remain concerned about the message sent by rumors of allowing offshore financial institutions to access U.S. dollars for foreign currency trades in support of so-called legitimate business with Iran. We must keep in mind that both our words and our deeds send a strong signal to Iran, our European allies, and our vital ally, Israel. Mr. President, in the months and years to come, we must make it clear to Iran, not just that we will not waver in enforcing the terms of the JCPOA, but also that our commitment to a successful nuclear agreement will not prevent us from taking action when Iran's bad behavior warrants it. With that, thank you, and I yield the floor.